The real-time real estate segment today being brought to you by rsrmoney.com, rsrmoney.com. Let's see. Do elections impact the housing market? Good question, and we're going to answer it right now. 2024 presidential election is just months away. As someone who thinks about potentially buying or selling a home, you're probably curious about what effect, if any, elections have on the housing market. Great question, because buying or selling a home is a major decision, and it's natural to wonder how much a major event might impact your plans. Historically, presidential elections have only had a small, temporary impact on the housing market. Here's the latest on exactly what's happened to home sales prices and mortgage rates throughout those time periods. Home sales during the month of November, in years when the presidential election takes place, there's typically a slight slowdown in home sales. Ali Wolf, chief economist at Zonda, explains, quote, "Usually home sales are unchanged compared to a non-election year, with the exception being November. In an election year, November is slower than normal," unquote. This is mostly because some people feel uncertain and hesitant about making big decisions during such a pivotal time. However, it's important to know this slowdown is temporary. Historically, home sales bounce back in December and continue to rise the following year. In fact, data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the National Association of Realtors, NAR, shows after 9 of the last 11 presidential elections, home sales went up the next year. Now, the question is, do they go up because of the presidential elections? Do they go up because they go up all the time? If you're watching us on ronsiegelradio.tv, any of our socials, or the ABC News and Talk AM 1490 FM 98.1 video feeds, you're seeing a chart of home sales that went up after 9 of the last 11 presidential elections. The graph shows annual home sales going back to 1978. Each year where the presidential election is noted on the chart, again, if you're watching us, in blue. The year immediately after each election is green. If existing home sales rose that year, the two orange bars represent the only years when home sales decreased after an election. And that's back in the 80s, 70s and 80s. Long time ago. Home prices. What about home prices? Do they drop during election years? Not typically. As residential appraiser and housing analyst Ryan Lundquist puts it, quote, "An election year doesn't alter the price trend that is already happening in the markets," unquote. Home prices are pretty resilient. They generally rise year over year, regardless of elections. The latest data from NAR shows after 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, home prices increased in the following year. Again, take a look at the graph, just like the previous graph. This shows election years in blue. The only year when prices declined after an election is in orange. That is in 2009. That was during the housing market crash, which is far from a typical year. Today's market is different than it was back then. All the green bars represent when prices rose the following year. So if you're worried about your home losing value because of an election, you can rest easy knowing prices rise after most presidential elections. Mortgage rates are important because they affect how much your monthly payment will be when you buy a home. Looking at the last 11 presidential election years, data from Freddie Mac shows mortgage rates decreased from July to November in 8 of those years. Most forecasts expect mortgage rates to ease slightly throughout the remainder of the year. If they're right, this year will follow the trend of declining rates leading up to most previous elections. And if you're looking to buy a home in the coming months, this could be good news, as lower rates could mean a lower monthly payment. So what's the big takeaway? While presidential elections do have impact on the housing market, the effects are usually small and temporary. As Lisa Sturdivant, chief economist of Bright MLS, says, quote, "Historically, the housing market doesn't tend to look very different in a presidential election years compared to other years," unquote. For most buyers and sellers, elections don't have a major impact on their plans. Bottom line, when it's natural to feel a bit uncertain during an election year, or while it's natural to feel uncertain during an election year, history shows the housing market remains strong and resilient. For help navigating the market, election year or not, give me a call, 800-306-1490. 1-990-800-306-1990. That is the real-time real estate segment brought to you by rsrmoney.com, rsrmoney.com.